Rachel and Thomas Whitmore were the couple everyone envied, wealthy, beautiful, and inseparable. But when Thomas vanished without a trace, and Rachel's carefully curated life began to fall apart, investigators uncovered a chilling truth. The woman who seemed to have it all was never who she claimed to be, and behind every version of her name was a man who ended up missing. In a quiet neighborhood just outside Savannah, Georgia, everything about the Whitmore residence suggested peace and prosperity. The lawn was always freshly cut, flowers neatly trimmed along the edges of the walkway. Neighbors often admired the tall white columns on the front porch and the subtle glow of lanterns that came on at dusk. Rachel and Thomas Whitmore were seen as the ideal couple, charming, generous, and always perfectly in sync. They hosted dinner parties that drew praise across town and were often the first to donate to any community cause. Rachel in particular was beloved. She ran clothing drives, organized holiday events, and was the face of more than one charitable campaign. People trusted her instantly. Thomas was quieter but equally admired. A financial consultant with a sharp mind and a reputation for integrity, he had built his firm from the ground up. Clients spoke highly of him, and colleagues called him dependable. He often credited his success to Rachel, saying she kept him grounded. Together they seemed unstoppable. Marriage goals, some said. They were the kind of couple who still left handwritten notes for each other, and took morning walks with matching coffee mugs. Or so it seemed. Everything changed on a Thursday morning in late April. Thomas was scheduled to give a keynote presentation at a major finance summit in downtown Savannah. It was an event he had prepared for over several weeks, but he never arrived. At first his staff assumed he was delayed, maybe car trouble or a family emergency. But as the hours passed and calls went unanswered, concern turned to panic. Thomas wasn't the kind of man who vanished without warning. That afternoon, Rachel called the office for an unrelated matter and seemed surprised to hear Thomas hadn't shown up. When asked if she knew where he was, she simply said, "He left early this morning like usual." Her voice was calm. Too calm, some later said. By nightfall, a missing person report had been filed. Police began tracing Thomas's last known steps. It didn't take long to find his car. Parked in a gravel lot near the Savannah River, the vehicle was locked, undamaged, and oddly pristine. Nothing seemed stolen or out of place except one detail. On the driver's seat sat Thomas's wedding ring. It was clean, polished, and carefully placed, as if it had been removed with intention. That discovery was the first real sign that something was deeply wrong. Not long after, search teams began combing the area. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Rachel appeared distraught in front of reporters, thanking the police and pleading for information. Yet those closest to the couple began to whisper. Something about her demeanor didn't sit right. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even disoriented. In fact, she seemed prepared, almost rehearsed. As investigators dug deeper into Thomas's life, the illusion of a perfect marriage started to crack. Beneath the surface of elegance and charity, there was something hidden, something dark, something no one in that peaceful neighborhood had even imagined. As the investigation into Thomas Whitmore's disappearance deepened, attention quickly turned to Rachel. Her initial calm was explained away as shock, but the more detectives observed her behavior, the more unsettling it became. She didn't ask many questions about the search, didn't demand updates, and never once accompanied police on site visits. Instead, she returned to her usual routines, hosting luncheons, volunteering at the shelter, and even attending a weekend garden tour just days after Thomas vanished. To neighbors, it was unnerving. To investigators, it was suspicious. When detectives reviewed home surveillance footage from the night before Thomas disappeared, they saw him returning home just after 9 p.m. His gait was steady, and he appeared alone. Rachel's car was already in the driveway, The footage then showed Thomas leaving the house early the next morning, again alone. That was the last time anyone confirmed seeing him alive. What the footage didn't show, however, was any interaction between Rachel and Thomas in that time frame. In fact, investigators later discovered that Rachel had deliberately disabled the interior cameras, claiming they were being serviced. The timing felt far too convenient. An even more troubling clue came from downtown surveillance. That same evening, Thomas had visited a small bar in Savannah's historic district. The footage showed him seated across from a woman, young, blonde, stylish. They talked closely for over an hour before leaving together. Her face wasn't in any police database, and none of Thomas's friends or co-workers recognized her. When asked, Rachel denied knowing who she was, insisting she and Thomas were closer than ever, and that he wasn't the type to be unfaithful. But Rachel's image of a stable, happy marriage began to crumble quickly. A digital forensics team analyzed Thomas E.'s phone and found a series of encrypted messages between him and an unknown number. The conversations suggested he was suspicious of someone close to him and had started looking into matters he couldn't ignore anymore. The last message he sent read, "If anything happens to me, start with her." It was never clear who her referred to, but investigators believed it pointed directly to Rachel. More red flags emerged when police examined Rachel's phone records. A burner phone had been purchased 6 weeks prior under an alias and had pinged at the same bar on the same night Thomas had met the unknown woman. That phone had since been powered off and never turned back on. The only number it contacted? The one Thomas had been exchanging encrypted messages with. Detectives also began interviewing people from Rachel's past. Former co-workers from previous towns remembered her differently. Charming but elusive, private about her background, and never staying in one place too long. One person mentioned she used to go by a different last name entirely, but couldn't remember what it was. Slowly, a different version of Rachel started to emerge. One that didn't match the glowing reputation she'd carefully built in Savannah. As the search for Thomas continued, the mystery of the woman he called his wife only deepened. The deeper investigators dug into Rachel's background, the more layers they uncovered, and none of them led to the life she had claimed to live. Public records revealed that Rachel Whitmore didn't exist before 2013. No high school, no college, no employment history. Nothing prior to her marriage to Thomas. Suspicious, detectives began cross-referencing facial recognition data with old records, starting with the one clue they had, an out-of-state storage unit leased under the name Marla Jensen, which they traced to Rachel through a recurring payment linked to one of Thomas's company cards. Inside the unit, they made a chilling discovery. Tucked in a metal file cabinet were boxes containing personal documents. Birth certificates, passports, driver's licenses, all in different names but with the same face. Alongside the paperwork were black and white photos from over a decade ago, including one of a smiling couple posing in front of the Grand Canyon. The man in the photo was identified as Daniel Lorne, Rachel's first husband. His death had been ruled an accidental fall during a hiking trip in Arizona in 2011. At the time, no one had suspected foul play. But now the similarities were impossible to ignore. Rachel had gone by the name Amelia Kent back then, and after Daniel's death she had vanished from the public record. 2 years later, Rachel Whitmore appeared in Georgia with a new name, a new look, and a new story. It seemed she'd reinvented herself completely, and not for the first time. Another record popped up from 2004, an open missing persons case in New York involving a woman named Amelia Kent. The file included a photo of a graduate student who bore a striking resemblance to Rachel. The case had gone cold. No body was ever found. Detectives now suspected that Rachel had stolen Amelia's identity after her disappearance. Whether Amelia was a previous version of Rachel, or someone she had crossed paths with remained unclear. But one thing was certain. The woman known as Rachel had been living under false names for over a decade, moving from state to state and man to man, with a trail of lies behind her. Back in Savannah, the investigation into Thomas's disappearance turned in a darker direction. Bank records showed that in the months before he went missing, over $450,000 had been quietly siphoned from company accounts into offshore holdings. The transfers had been small enough to avoid notice, but frequent enough to add up. Thomas had clearly discovered the theft and had likely confronted Rachel. That confrontation may have sealed his fate. To the public, Rachel still maintained the role of the grieving wife. But behind closed doors, law enforcement was now building a case not just for financial crimes, but for something far worse. They believed Rachel was not simply a woman with secrets. She was a serial manipulator, a chameleon who changed identities as easily as others changed clothes, leaving behind only grief, confusion, and missing pieces. As detectives pieced together the timeline leading up to Thomas's disappearance, the financial trail became even more disturbing. Rachel hadn't just been quietly draining funds. She had created an elaborate network of shell companies, using them to move money through layers of transactions that were difficult to trace. Most of these companies were registered under names that matched the false identities found in the storage unit. It was a sophisticated operation, one far beyond what anyone thought a volunteer event planner was capable of. Investigators began to suspect that Rachel's past was just a series of bad relationships or assumed names. It was a calculated system of deceit that stretched back nearly 2 decades. The woman seen with Thomas at the bar, the young blonde no one could identify, became a critical piece of the puzzle. For weeks she remained a mystery. Then, through a lead from an independent journalist following the case, police identified her as Elise Harper, a private investigator from Atlanta. Elise had been hired by Thomas himself. Emails recovered from a laptop at Thomas' OAS office confirmed that he'd begun having suspicions about Rachel months earlier. Elise was brought in to verify Rachel's background discreetly, but she had uncovered more than either of them had anticipated. Elise had traced Rachel's past to at least 3 different aliases and was on the verge of exposing her when the burner phone Rachel purchased began sending threatening messages. One text found in Elise's phone records read, "Stop digging, or disappear like the others." After that, Elise stopped responding to Thomas and their communication went cold just days before he vanished. Investigators now believed Rachel had discovered Elise's identity and used her access to Thomas' office to intercept emails and uncover the investigation against her. What no one could understand was how Rachel managed to stay one step ahead. A forensic sweep of Thomas' office revealed a hidden listening device inside a desk ornament, an object Rachel had given him as an anniversary gift. It had been recording conversations for months, feeding her information she used to protect herself and manipulate those around her. This discovery changed the entire scope of the case. Rachel hadn't just reacted to suspicion, she had anticipated it. She had been controlling the narrative long before anyone realized there was even a story to tell. With mounting evidence, police obtained a warrant to search a remote cabin in Tennessee that Rachel had listed as a rental property in tax documents. It was a secluded place far from neighbors and surrounded by thick woods. In the basement, buried beneath concrete flooring, forensic teams uncovered human remains. Dental records confirmed it was Thomas. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and traces of a powerful sedative were found in what remained of his bloodstream. Rachel was arrested in the middle of a local book club meeting, calmly reading from a psychological thriller. She didn't resist, didn't speak, and didn't appear surprised. Her silence only deepened the mystery. Everyone wanted to know, was this the first time she had killed, or just the first time she had been caught? The trial of Rachel Whitmore became one of the most talked about cases in recent history. Reporters flooded the courthouse. True crime podcasts dissected every twist, and online forums filled with theories. But as the evidence unfolded in court, one fact became undeniable. Rachel had carefully crafted each chapter of her life, each identity, with chilling precision. Prosecutors described her as methodical and remorseless, a woman who used charm to lower defenses and lies to build walls no one thought to climb. Witnesses came forward from across the country, each adding another piece to the puzzle. A former landlord in Arizona remembered her as Amelia, a quiet woman who left in a hurry after her husband died. A co-worker in Florida recalled her calling herself Claire, claiming she had lost her family in a car accident. These stories followed the same pattern. Rachel would appear suddenly, gain trust quickly, and vanish without a trace when suspicion crept in. Each time she left behind financial irregularities, broken relationships, and unanswered questions. The prosecution laid out the timeline clearly. Rachel had embedded herself into Thomas's life, slowly gaining access to his finances and social circles. When Thomas became suspicious and hired Elise Harper to investigate her, Rachel acted swiftly. She used the listening device to monitor Thomas's plans, intercepted Elise's identity, and took steps to neutralize the threat. By the time Thomas realized just how deep her lies went, it was too late. Rachel had already planned his murder and the disposal of his body. The defense attempted to paint Rachel as a misunderstood woman with a traumatic past, arguing that her multiple identities were a result of running from abuse. But the evidence was overwhelming. The documents in the storage unit, the financial transfers, the surveillance footage, the messages from the burner phone, it all told the same story. This wasn't desperation. It was design. After a 2-week trial, the jury took less than 6 hours to deliver their verdict. Guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. Rachel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She remained emotionless as the sentence was read, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the courtroom walls. But even as she was led away in handcuffs, questions still lingered. During the investigation, authorities uncovered records linked to 5 other names Rachel had used in various states, all connected to missing men or unsolved financial crimes. While no additional bodies were found, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Each case had gone cold. Each had ended just as Rachel moved on to her next life. To this day, no one knows Rachel's real name. Her fingerprints didn't match any national database. Her earliest identity, Amelia Kent, had itself been tied to a missing persons report from 2 decades earlier. It's as if she stepped into existence mid-story, already in disguise. Rachel's story wasn't just about a failed marriage or a hidden crime. It was about how easily someone can become whoever they want to be, if they're careful enough. Marriage, love, charity, all of it had been a mask. And behind it was a woman no one ever truly knew.